Let's begin this morning with new and fast developments happening with the war. The Defense Department has just identified a third U.S. soldier killed from Iranian strikes in the Middle East over the weekend. The Defense Department says 30-year-old Sergeant Michael Emmanuel Swinton was killed in an attack at a U.S. airbase in Iraq on Saturday. This comes as the U.S. marks a 10th straight night of U.S. strikes on Iran. Tehran says it has hit back targeting U.S. assets in Kuwait and Bahrain and Jordan. And as the fighting intensifies, CBS News has exclusively learned nearly 100 U.S. service members have been injured in Iranian strikes just this month. The Pentagon says 96% of them have returned to duty. CBS News senior national security correspondent Charlie D'Agata is live from Amman, Jordan. So, Charlie, a couple of things to help our audience understand. The Pentagon has been delaying the release of this information. That is your reporting, the reporting at CBS News. They've been delaying the information on how many troops have been wounded. Now, I got to believe that part of what has been difficult for reporters and yourself and others is the fact that the rules have changed as to how we interface with the Pentagon based on even where we were situated in the Pentagon press office. But why would, in previous years, how would you be made aware of deaths or injuries in active military situations, and how is it today?
Yeah, Vlad, that's a good place to start. And by the way, I have to give full credit to our colleagues back in Washington, D.C., who have been doggedly pursuing this. They've been doing the hard work of trying to figure out what these numbers are like. Now, in my experience, my long experience, the Pentagon doesn't necessarily provide information that you don't ask for, in a manner of speaking, right? So there's a place where we can go. It's actually a website that you can go to where you can get a casualty report. Those numbers were not in that report. Not necessarily withholding them, but there's a lag time about that. So you have to continue to press onto those questions. And when our colleagues press to those questions, the chief spokesman, Sean Parnell, released a statement, first to CBS News and then to the rest of the media shortly after that. Again, with those numbers, that nearly 100 U.S. service personnel have been injured in recent weeks. It goes further than that, however. That doesn't include the dozens who have been injured and wounded here, or the three people who have been killed, Jordan and Iraq. So even that lag time isn't counted in that. And it has to do with consolidating those numbers, certifying what happened, whether or not, as Sean Parnell pointed out, 96% of those individuals have returned to duty. They wanted to return to duty. We're talking about concussions, TBI. That would be standard when you've got incoming. But I think the takeaway here is the intensity and the increase in the number of attacks that Iran has been able to wage against U.S. military facilities during this so-called ceasefire. This is only a couple of weeks ago, and as I said, that has only increased here in Jordan. It's the reason we're here, because Iran has trained its guns and its weapons on Jordan itself. We had air raid sirens yesterday. That's the first time we've had those in months here in Jordan, and going after U.S. military bases where two soldiers were killed at an air base here in Jordan. Another, as you mentioned, north of here in Iraq, and a third person is still listed as missing. So what we're talking about is a reflection in the intensity of the fight that Iran is waging against U.S. military facilities here.
Charlie, obviously one way is to measure the impact of the war is the loss of American lives, as you're talking about. Another way that people are measuring it back home is the economic impact, rising gas prices. And that, of course, always makes us talk about the Strait of Hormuz. So, I mean, we've seen these recent U.S. airstrikes. Has that done anything to convince Tehran to loosen its grip on the Strait?
Kelly, 10 consecutive nights of airstrikes. We get these updates overnight. It's not overnight for us here, overnight for you guys in the United States. We get those updates from Central Command. They're in charge of this region. You saw those videos. It shows fighter jets taking off. It shows the cockpit cameras striking these targets along the Strait of Hormuz. In fact, expanding along the Strait of Hormuz. Yet, despite 10 nights, consecutive nights of airstrikes, trying to loosen that siege, it hasn't done anything to budge Iran's capability to continue striking ships, which they have in the past 24 hours, along that strait. And we have to take this back to the full combat. Despite what we're watching here, this is not a return to full combat operations. That was in the beginning of the war in February and March. And even with the full force of the U.S. military, that was unable to break the siege of the Strait of Hormuz. We have to keep reminding our viewers, however, the U.S. Military blockade is there. It started up again against about a week ago. So you've got this sort of, I wouldn't even call it a standoff because it's a dynamic situation. It's not like they're looking at each other across the bow. There are attacks on either side, but the blockade, the U.S. military blockade is there, and Iran continues to hold their siege on their side of the Strait of Hormuz.
Wow. All right. Charlie Daggett reporting from Jordan for us. Charlie, as always, we appreciate you. Stay safe.
CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro joins us now from our D.C. bureau. So, Aaron, we were just talking with Charlie. The casualties, the costs are ramping up. How is the White House defending this war, and where do lawmakers stand?
Good morning, Vlad and Kelly. Well, President Trump, in response to those two service personnel that were found dead, wrote on Truth Social yesterday, quote, "Every time Iran kills an American soldier, they will pay for that killing many times over," signaling the continued escalation that is expected from the U.S. But their overall defense of the war has remained on shaky ground since the ceasefire was declared over by the president. He said that the U.S. military actions have been meant to prevent Iran from ever having a nuclear weapon, but direct talks between the two countries about that topic have been put on pause for several weeks now. And instead, the U.S. has had to deal with Iran continually striking commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz as transit through that crucial waterway has remained volatile for most of July. We will see Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth on Capitol Hill later today, where he will have to try and defend this ongoing war during a Senate panel where he's supposed to be asking for more funding, $67.1 billion for the Pentagon to continue the war. But lawmakers say they've been in the dark and are looking to get more answers on what exactly the White House's endgame is. Take a listen to what they said on Capitol Hill yesterday.
We haven't had a meaningful Gang of Eight meeting in months. And there's obviously been a lot of developments in Iran, including the tragic, fatalities there.
It's been weeks since the administration has briefed us. I think we've got a brief tomorrow, so hopefully that'll help.
We got a brief in Gang of Eight maybe 4 or 5 days ago by telephone. It's difficult when everybody's scattered around the country because these are highly classified. It's hard to do it on the phone.
Picking up on that last quote from Speaker Mike Johnson, in addition to the testimony at the Senate panel, there will also be a closed-door briefing with the Gang of Eight later today with Secretary Hegseth and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Dan Kane, with congressional leaders who get briefed on highly classified intel and operations. We will see if their questions on what exactly is going on in Iran will be answered.
So the president, as you know, Aaron, is also set to meet with the president of Lebanon at the White House today. What can we expect from that?
Yeah, President Joseph Aoun is coming as the Israeli military begins to withdraw, at least at a limited level, its forces from Lebanon. And he is likely to ask President Trump to make sure Israel holds up to that part of the agreement. That political support could once again put Trump and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu at odds. But it is in the White House's interest to continue to de-escalate that conflict between Israel and Lebanon, as that has been a sticking point in the U.S.'s own negotiation attempts with Iran. And Secretary of State Marco Rubio said before his trip to Manila that the best way to beat the Hezbollah militant group in Lebanon is by the U.S. strengthening the Lebanese government and their military. So securing that support from Trump in the first face-to-face meeting between these two men is expected to be the main dynamic when he comes to the White House later this morning.
All right, Aaron, appreciate it.